it's got this really ungainly gallery space, this part of the balcony that nobody can figure out how to use. In fact, most of the graduate student shows I've seen there, they just leave that area kind of empty because like nobody wants to use it. And so I go in for this whole day of studio visits, and there's like, there's Bucky Miller, and he takes me to the back, and he's picked that space, and he's done this incredibly fascinating way of spatializing photographs. Things are wrapped around, the scale is really incongruous, giant prints of small images, small prints of big images. And then the last corner, there was an image of an Afghan dog. An Afghan dog is already not nature, it's already near to being sculpture, particularly with their crop. And it was wrapped around this hidden pedestal. And I started laughing out loud. I was like, whoa. And I knew at that point he was going to win the Umlauf Prize for the Afghan. And the Umlauf is a very strange institution. It was the old studio of Charles Umlauf, who was the UT sculpture professor. And it's basically a sculpture park. You wander the grounds, there's a small gallery space. And he was like, I've got this. And I showed up to do the talk with him, and he had put photographs throughout the exterior space, interstitial spaces of the interior space. You get to look out a window for one. And the moment there, which was like the Afghan, was there was one of those paths that I didn't know where it went because I'd never gone that far at the Umlauf. And there was I think you called the security goose. It was this,
the boundary goose.
The boundary goose.
Yeah.
It was this kind of fuzzy, out of focus image of a goose that was mounted on this billboard at the end. Like, you would not dare to cross that goose. It was just like, you were not going to go beyond where the limit was. And then there was another image that was almost looked like a raw billboard with nothing on it. And he explained it was his favorite brick.
Yeah.
And a brick that he was very fond of.
Yeah.
And it looked like, it was so trompe l'oeil. The brick looked like it was a real brick. And so I was saying, this is someone very interesting to look at. And so when John asked me to do the talk here, I knew one thing about Jonathan Hopson Gallery is its space is so much a part of the experience here. So hanging a show of just photographs on the wall would be boring here, and because you've got to engage the space. And I knew Bucky would do an interesting job. So when you saw this space, Bucky, what was your first thought?
Oh, it's my dream space, I think. Well, first, thanks everybody for being here. But I, for some reason in my head for a really long time, I've had this idea that I needed to do a show that was in 2 rooms. And when John asked me to do the show, I hadn't actually been to this gallery before. I'd been to John's old space, but I had seen pictures and I knew that this was 2 rooms. And so one of my first thoughts was, oh, that's perfect. That's what I've been looking for. And I wasn't even sure what it was about 2 rooms that was so important. I just knew that if I had the ability to kind of separate things into 2 utterances as opposed to, I mean, even at the Umlauf, it was, I guess that's sort of, because there's inside and outside, but the inside space, just thinking about how it's just like sort of this room. It's, it's a strange room, but it's still just a room. So that was really exciting. And then coming here for the first time and kind of getting to walk around and looking at the show that was up and just getting a sense of the space, I realized that this is the really, really weird thing about this gallery that I really love is that it's totally like being in someone's house, because you're in someone's house, and it doesn't hide the fact that it's someone's house, but it also doesn't feel at all like being in someone's house. It feels like being in a gallery, like completely. And the fact that it could be doing both of those things at once was really kind of a big deal, just because whenever I think about photography in any sort of extended way, I always end up at this place where photography is a little of this and it's a little of that. Photography is, it rides a line between so many things, and then I always land at, oh, well, it's both. Photography is just always both. And no matter how you're thinking of it, photography is always both. So to put a medium that's, for me, always both in a space that was somehow also always both, I thought was really ideal. And that's also how I decided that I was going to just, because I get the Miller show, I had some objects and I had some other things that weren't photographs necessarily, and that's how that helped me decide that this was going to be specifically a photography show, because I wanted to kind of question what that meant in a space like this.
The existential problem of photography today that is ubiquitous, we're all sending images to each other and this thing that flows through everything. And then you do these very corporealized, spatialized thing. We're sitting in front of the most sort of radical gesture of this giant porthole into the sky that you could jump through the floor. I thought if we could end the talk by jumping into it, it would be really good. Just disappearing. And in this space, in gallery architecture, windows are bad because although they're beautiful, you can't hang stuff on them. So this section of the gallery is always a tricky thing for artists to use. And when I walked in to see the solution, which was also like, oh, of course, Bucky does it before. Can you tell me a little bit about the origin of this image and how you picked?
Yeah, I mean, first, I love the clear chairs in front of it. It kind of helps the idea that we can fall back. I've always, this is a total tangent, but I've always really wanted to sit in one of these clear chairs. I've seen them around for years. They're really fun. I'm sorry. The second tangent, I haven't been drinking any coffee, and Bill just bought me this giant coffee.
Fantastic. It's going to be a great talk.
Yeah. So, anyway, with that out of the way, I've actually been sitting on this photograph for a long time. It's one of the older files. It's existed on my hard drive for a couple of years now, and I've never found really an appropriate situation for it in the past. I like it, and I've liked it as potentially just a photograph, a normal photograph that hangs on a wall or something, but it never quite worked. It never quite had enough for any of the shows that I've done in the past. But when I came here and I saw this space, I realized that it was a really, like, the light that this runs across the floor right here all day is really beautiful, just all the time. And I've been wanting to do a photograph on a horizontal surface for a while, because when I was de-installing the show that Bill came to see at UT, I had some of the phototext prints there, and this material is really great in that you can peel it off of things and stick it right back onto other stuff. And so I had a print from that show that I actually stuck to my coffee table in my house, and seeing it there every day at that angle, I just really fell in love with that way of looking at a photograph. And then when I came here and saw the space, like, that's where it needs to go. And I went through all these ideas in my head of different sorts of platforms or things that I could build here to put the photograph on, like some sort of table or something. And then I realized that I was trying too hard, I was thinking too hard, and that I could just stick it right to the floor, like, why not? And then I had this conversation with John where I was messing around with sizes and seeing how big the photograph should be there. And it just happened that these dark strips of wood were the perfect width for one of the natural aspect ratios of the, like, if you make this photograph as wide as it can be on the material that I had, it just perfectly lines up to be the space between these two dark strips somehow, which is like the same thing as there being just enough people sitting on the chairs today. Like when those things happen, you kind of gotta listen to them, I think, because it's just, you're not gonna always land like that. And when I do, I'm like, oh my god, yeah, it's gotta be that. But then the other great thing about it is like, as the light, it keeps being overcast days when I'm here, but I've seen every time I'm here it's been overcast. But I've seen pictures where you see the light kind of coming across it, and I really love that play between kind of looking down, but you're looking up into the sky, and then the light's hitting it, and there are like all of these layers of information kind of landing on top of each other in that way. It's sort of spatial confusion. I love the idea of being able to like dive through it like a portal. I think that would be magnificent.
The in-between category thing, which I think everything I've seen you do is slips in between categories. Photo as object, photo as just a free-floating image. This show also runs this thing where like a lot of the images look black and white, and then they'll be like, you can tell they're really color. And so, you got the black and white photo tradition, the color photo tradition. Also, the line between documentary and staged, is confounded in here.
Yeah.
And then also because you do so many things that are officially wrong in terms of photo composition, but you pile them up in this way that is becomes this like hyper aesthetic. Like when I look at John the dog, that little one, and you've got the dog's face is missing and it's just the butt coming out from behind the column. It's like everything about that is wrong, and then the fact that it's looks black and white except for the stripe on the column. What is so significant to you about slipping between definable categories?
That's such a cool question. I mean, as far as doing it with photography goes, I think it's important to remember that in a way every photograph is staged, no matter how much of a decisive moment it is or whatever. But on the other hand, every photograph is also really something that was actually there. And so that sort of slippery nature of the medium, I think, doesn't always get enough attention. So maybe I obsess about that. Maybe I pay more attention to that than I might otherwise. But beyond that, even the show is called The Toad. It's
That's also the name of that photograph.
Yeah, which is the titular toad.
The titular toad.
Yeah. So there's another species called toad, which is also the same. So if you've read the thing, you know a little bit about this, but like the toad has just been living in that craft. That's as straightforward documentary as I make a picture, that one, because that is a picture of the toad in its home in a crack on the steps outside my apartment. And it's been there since I moved to Austin. It comes back every spring and goes away in the winter. And I know that it's not actually the same toad all the time. It's like I have enough of an understanding to know that when I see it get massive one day and then tiny the next, or I mean, the worst, the toad died once.
The toad died?
It was run over in my parking lot, yeah, but then it came back to life. And so, I think that and this is honestly how I talk to the toad. I'm not putting on a front at all when I'm actually, I really love this toad, and I talk to my friends about the toad, and I've never talked about it as toads or a toad. It's always
the toad.
Yeah, and so I think that this sort of this slip in between like what I know and like what I don't know, but like pretend to know almost is really important to me, because that's the only way I really know how to be, and I want to kind of introduce other people to situations through photographs where they're not sure whether or not they can hang on to what they think they know, and maybe the things that seem really factual start to become incredibly confusing, because that's photography. Really.
Well, like you said, you found that route.
Yeah.
And you carried it around for like a while.
Sure.
Until you figured out what to do to photograph that route.
Right.
And you said you had a friend hold it up.
Yeah, that's just a friend. There's a wider version of that with my friend's fist, like holding it, and that was actually. I thought that was going to be the picture, but then it just ended up working better without that. But there's, like everything in all of the pictures is found, whether or not it's photographed as I found it. I kind of think of the process of photograph. There's that FSA photographer whose last name I always forget, Arthur Rothstein, who carried around a cow skull with him in his truck as he was making these photographs of the Dust Bowl in order to find the perfect place to put it, and like the same cow skull pops up in a bunch of his photographs to try and show the desolation of Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl. And he was presenting these as straightforward documentary photographs, and then people got enraged when they realized that he was moving this skull around and essentially creating the scene. But the skull was really of that landscape, and it's the same. It's like that's how I feel about something like The Root. It's like I didn't photograph it right where I found it, but it's still like it's a part of this process of discovery, and it's a part of the world of the pictures. And so it's like there's a lot of flexibility about how much that's touched.
Well, it's also, I mean, when you're learning photo history and you find out that the Civil War photographs, they would move the corpses around to make it more aesthetic. And you're like, it's dragging the corpse around is a lot less icky than moving the skull around.
Right.
And
That's well said.
Yeah. But speaking of that, there's very little human presence in your work. And the one guy in it, Robert, and that is, when you look at it, it looks like a guy walking through a parking lot or walking through like in front of like warehouses, and it's not. Can you tell a little bit of that story about how that photo came to be?
Yeah, I mean, well, the only actual human presence are the hands holding the fossil.
Yeah.
The picture that's up there, and that.
And they're presenting it to a dog.
Yeah, that's sort of the Charlie Brown adult voice person. That's that's like giving the rest. It's like the connection between the worlds or something. But those hands like coming down from the ceiling are the only time that actually happens. But the photograph in the center of that little Robert, it's not actually Robert Oppenheimer, but I decided that it is. It's a photograph that I made in Los Alamos, New Mexico, at a science museum of a 3D simulation, interactive, essentially video game recreation of Los Alamos National Laboratory in 1944. And you can walk around and look at military jeeps driving around patrolling and it's entirely pointless. It's a completely, you can't engage with anything. It's a totally superficial world with just these sprites moving.
Yeah. And since officially Los Alamos didn't exist then, and didn't have there was no name on the map anymore, because it had to be a secret town. You sent the mail to Santa Fe, and they would come get it later on.
Yeah. And so this guy in the town in the simulation, I found him just walking in place. He was stuck. I mean, the computer, whoever made it was not very good, and this guy, he just walked in place forever. And I thought that what was going to happen was that I was going to have like a Muybridge style sequence of like scientist locomotion, of his feet moving in place. But then when I actually made I took maybe 30 photographs of that, and if you look at them on my hard drive now, they're all essentially identical because it's really just 3 different frames of his legs moving repeated. And so it didn't work, but then I realized that it works enough just as an individual photograph that it was.
It's sort of like the Beckett moment, like they're going to keep getting buried on the map.
But it became a really nice, I thought, centerpiece for that wall because when you come in, you can actually see it. Yeah. And from the door, I think it does read as a person, but then that sort of dissolves and you understand that you're seeing a simulation of something once you actually get in there. There's a personal significance to it being Los Alamos, and I think about I think about the sort of historical implications of that place and in a sort of tangential way that don't find their way into this work necessarily, but I don't know, being from the Southwest and kind of.
You're from Arizona?
I'm from Phoenix.
Phoenix.
Yeah. So just being in that landscape and thinking about sort of the modern history of the Southwest has always, I think, been really fascinating to me. It has like guided a lot of how I just think about the world and my work. Anyway.
You know, in everything I've seen, there's been dogs in every show I've seen.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
Dogs are this thing where like we think like, oh, there are little wolves, there are little like Call of the Wild in our living room, but then they're actually so genetically constructed and altered over millennia that they're like as far from being like that pure wolf again. And we all talk about our dogs all the time.
Oh yeah.
There's so many dogs in
With all
this
of
show, including over here behind the window.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's Hemingway on the window.
Who's Hemingway?
Hemingway lives in Los Angeles. Hemingway's cool.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is running strips from movies now.
Yeah. Has very rigid legs that the front legs don't really bend.
Yeah.
So in the photograph, he just has no legs. I'm helping. But I mean, I think for a long time I wasn't photographing things that I cared about.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I just recently finished, not too long ago, essentially 7 years of art education. And there's a point in that where you get so sort of invested in the minutia and mechanics that you forget the joy. Or at least I did for a minute. I forgot about pleasure in art, and I was actually out photographing something else one time in Austin a couple of years ago, and a friend of mine happened to walk by with his dog, and I was like, oh, can I get a photograph of Cobalt while we're out here? Like why not? You know, and then I ended up really loving that photograph, and I felt like it opened a giant window for me that had been shut. And because I love dogs, and I feel like, in a way, I don't really photograph people. I don't feel comfortable photographing people. But dogs kind of became my stand-ins for people, but also my sort of stand-in for myself a lot of the time too. Like I relate to the dogs in the pictures. Not all of them, but a lot of them feel familiar to me. While also, being like the toad in this way where I can never quite actually know them.
But the Afghan I first saw, that was not a dog you knew.
That dog's long dead.
Yeah.
That dog's like that was a stock photo from the 1940s that I found it at an antique store and scanned it and blew it up.
Yeah.
And there's a new one.
Was it a new Afghan?
No, there's a new appropriated dog that I'm working with.
In this show?
No. It's like brand. It's 2 days old.
Okay, because I thought.
Because
honestly, like having now seen, Bucky also had a show at Houston Center for Photography a few months ago. I'm always used to like I will leave a Bucky Miller show and they're like, well, you saw that one that was hanging by the ceiling or that was in the parking lot, and I'm like, what? So if there was another dog in the show that I missed, I'd be like, yeah, of course.
Well, I mean, I don't know. There could be. But
there's a few hidden elements which I do urge you, if you haven't already poked around, like short of going into Deborah and John's private areas to look for photographs. There could be something hidden there too, though.
I thought about it, but
yeah.
I was like, no, don't need to do the bathroom this time. But I'm sorry, what was I going to say? Oh, just I love giving people those like opportunities to discover something.
Yeah.
And I don't really care. This has nothing to do with the discovery, but I don't really care if I find the picture. If it works, it works. So like the appropriated Afghan, it worked.
Yeah.
I feel like most people probably haven't seen it. It looks almost like a portrait of a saint or something. But yeah, there's a new one that I'm excited about, but I don't want to talk about it yet.
Well, and like I said, one of the weirdest elements of the show, as someone that knows the work well, are the two photo murals on the wall, because I could not read them, and I finally had to ask what the hell was going on today, because I thought it was like a photo of a concrete cube that had a picture of a picket fence painted on it that you had found and then turned into a wall transfer, and then I'm like, that was totally wrong. And once Bucky gave me the clue that it was actually a negative, and when I was looking at shadows, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's not too far off. It's essentially what it's a shadow and not paint. But yeah, it's a negative, and there are two of it. A lot of the pictures actually, there's the dog is three times, and then the cube is twice, and then there's the one dog that repeats itself within the same photograph. But with the cubes, that's, I mean, I'm diving into my photography dork persona with those in a certain way, because it's, one of the things about photography is that it's super reproducible, and you can churn it out in this way, and I thought it'd be fun to make the negative the thing that was reproduced, since generally that's the thing that you make the reproductions from.
Yeah.
But I don't even shoot film, so it's like I'm just a jerk or something. But and then beyond that, I thought for a long time that I really needed something to happen in both rooms. I thought that was one of my initial thoughts about the show, is that there needed to be sort of a fluid point between the two rooms, like a portal. Essentially, you can travel through this one into that one and come out in sequence in the same place over there. And
like some sort of sci-fi nightmare.
Sure.
You don't get to ever leave.
I mean, there are a bunch of portals. Yeah. No. Oh, yeah. And you don't, though. I know. But there's a bunch of portals. There's some things in this other room that have this feeling of sort of moving through space.
And actually, until I sat here and realized I could see both of the cubes at the same time, I didn't realize I could do that. And it makes a really weird stuttering of space.
Yeah, and the one in there is totally guided by the amount of space that's here. Because it had to kind of wedge in around the corner to fit on this wall.
Yeah.
So I just did the same.
And the doubling of the turning in space is very perverse and interesting. I gotta ask about the story with self-portrait.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's I don't think of you as a bag of bread, but I can see you as a bag of bread.
Very well.
Yeah.
So that is, it's truly a self-portrait. I was having that kind of day. No, I had, that's my car. It's, I think you can see it. Yeah, it's really dirty. That's my car, and I had just been hit in San Marcos earlier that day by a college student that kind of sideswiped me. And so that was a brand new injury to my car. And then I went home and I got dinner, and when I left the restaurant, there was just a bag of bread sitting on the bench outside of Mother's. And so Mother's is the restaurant. And I was like, and I recognized it as the bread they served there. So this is their leftover bread, and I took it home with me. I have bread. Cool. So it's really it's very much just a document of that. That's my documentary wall. Yeah. That's the wall that's the most straightforward in this entire thing, even though that picture.
Well, so you've got an immortal toad.
Yeah.
You've got a self-portrait as a bag of bread, and you've got a dog's butt. So that's your documentary wall.
Yeah. That dog, there's good stories about all those pictures, actually. The dog's name is actually Jon Snow.
Yeah.
I was on a walk, and I was photographing the dog, and the owner came out of Supercuts and said, "Are you photographing my dog? Is he going to be famous?" And I said,
Maybe.
In a way, in a sense.
And he said, "Well, he already is. His name is Jon Snow, the Human Whisperer. Look him up on Facebook." And so I did. We're Facebook friends now.
With the dog?
He's like a Austin dog celebrity, apparently.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's the most straightforward wall probably in the entire show, which was kind of my intent from the beginning, was to have things. I mean, it's not entirely the case, but to have the first room be a little more subdued and have things get a little wilder as I moved into the second room.
Well, even having what looks like a fussy garden crop sitting in the fireplace here, and over the fireplace, as if it could be lit on fire or as if it's kindling. And so, I mean, that's sort of that's another of those really sort of playful gestures of putting that, because when I first saw the space before shows were installed here, I'm like, that fireplace is beautiful, but it's taking up an awful lot of exhibition space. And to see people come up with ways to use it is really
It's
interesting.
super fun. The
Yeah.
fireplace was. I thought a lot about it. I went through a lot of ideas as what could maybe be on the mantle, or
Yeah.
and this ended up just working sort of serendipitously. But I really.
And speaking of what's on the mantle, let's talk about the self-portrait.
The goblin self.
The goblin.
Oh yeah. So
the little sculpture up there.
So I make those. I call them goblins. Some people have seen them as elephants or things, but it's just children's modeling clay. Essentially, it's air hardening clay that I buy on Amazon, and I make them quite regularly. And I decided that one would work really well on the mantelpiece as a mascot.
So it's sort of the artist is always here, even when you're back in Austin.
So that one in particular is basically me. Like that's the one I've made out of like probably 50 total that feels like a self-portrait to me. And I felt like it should be here. And it I don't know. I have a lot of fun stories about them. Well, I started making them in graduate school, and then in my studio. And one day, one of my professors came into my studio and looked at the table where there were maybe 24 of them sitting there, and he pointed and he goes, "That looks like an anxiety attack." Yeah. And it's this funny thing where it's I don't know what they are, but I love them.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel like they're this nice little like footnote or something to the pictures.
Well, knowing the UT Austin program pretty well, it's not like a place where people who want to be like a classic photographer go.
Yeah.
And that most of your faculty who I'm friends with are like sort of boundary bursting conceptualists who with weird senses of humor and produce artists who are on the whole like doing paintings of giant dachshunds or prosthetic devices, and I think John knows what I'm referring to. So it's like you when you picked that school, you were not looking for like classic photo education.
No, because I had that.
Yeah, as an undergrad.
As an undergrad, I had that. I mean, my undergraduate, I was taught in a really traditional
The
manner.
zone system and everything.
Yeah, by very traditionally minded landscape photographers. And I a lot of the stuff that I do now even is kind of in reaction to landscape photography and the traditions of landscape photography, because that's what I come from. The photograph over the fireplace is called New Topographics, which is a joke about there was a photography show in the 1970s that was called New Topographics. That was kind of the first time that a lot of landscape photographers who just photographed in opposition to the Ansel Adams tradition were gathered together for one show. You know, it was a lot of photographs of parking lots and strip malls and things like that. And that picture has always seemed very much in that tradition, but then there's also this kind of joke of it being this new topographic. It's like this big lump that's coming out of the ground. And then also, you know, in talking to you today about it, I was thinking, oh, that's really funny that I'm like throwing that into the fireplace. So there are a lot of things about it, but I had a really, really solid photo education, and I didn't want to do the same thing in grad school, and I feel really lucky that I did go to UT, because I think like there was never, I know people who've gone to grad schools looking for, like photographers who've gone to graduate school looking for a wider experience, and at a lot of places it seems like there's an effort made to push those people away from photography altogether and into other media, and I never experienced that at UT. It was always accepted that I was working in photography, and the questions were always more about how.
Yeah.
And actually, I recently ran into one of my professors at a gathering, and she was trying to describe my work to somebody, and she said it's kind of like photography if it was spelled with 2 E's at the end instead of a Y. I like that.
I think that too, and even though I cannot explain that at all.
There's just yeah.
Photography.
Yeah. I embrace it.
Yeah.
I'm into it.
Actually, the idea of curating a show called Photography, spelled that way, would actually be interesting. Because right now, for those of you who've taken advantage of it, with PhotoFest going on, there's something like 75 photo shows around the city. You could spend the entire week just seeing photo shows and seeing all variety of anything that's lens-based in the city simultaneously. And I'm pretty sure at the end of next week you would never want to see a photograph. Just because there's so much of every variety. And like I woke up and I said to Mark this morning, like, Mark, when are we going to get around to see all the PhotoFest shows? And he looked at me and goes like, I can't. It's only about 3 days of work. We can do it.
And that's a thing that happens too when you've had a traditional photography education and when you stay invested in that world. There reaches a point where it's just you're oversaturated. I mean, I pay way more attention to what's going on in photography probably than I do other media, just because that's what I've known for a long time.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at other things, but all my friends from undergrad are involved in photography, and so I have this sort of built-in network there, and it's really easy to have those conversations, and those conversations are vitally important to me. They're like really stimulating and life-giving in a way. But at the same time, I'm so exhausted by it so often. I find it so much of it is there's such a mass of photography that's so challenging to sift through. And I was talking to somebody yesterday about how a lot of times my photographs aren't technically sound.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, but that's new. That's like new for me. I know it's not a brand new thing to do or anything, but I feel like mistakes allow for more freedom than if you're always adhering strictly to the rules of like how a photograph is. I don't know.
Yes. Well, because I had to talk in my schedule today, I have a get out of jail free card to not have to be at the all-day photo symposium at the MFA today. That serious photo nerds they've been there since 10 a.m. and they're going to be there till 6 p.m. discussing the nature of photography. You can catch the second half if that's
We're having more fun.
I'm sure it'll be fascinating.
We're having more. I don't know. I want art to be fun.
Yeah.
I really do.
Well, I'm curious because the photo world is kind of obsessing about the new photography show that just opened in MoMA.
I haven't seen it yet.
Well, I haven't seen it. I'll see it in May when I go up.
Yeah.
But it's on the city of humanism and feelings and emotions. And everyone's like, no, people haven't talked about emotions in photography in a long time. And everyone says this current incarnation of new photography at MoMA is. Have you seen it already? Or I'm really curious to see what it's going to be like, and to see whether or not it's really the new coming. This might be a good time to open up to questions. Bucky does take questions on almost any topic, so feel free.
I actually have two questions, and the first one is whether you got credit for having anxiety attacks.
With the
goblin.
I think Jack's suggestion was just to get rid of them entirely and do away with that. He thought that it was right when I got back from a semester abroad.
Yeah.
I had this amazing opportunity in grad school to study in London for a semester.
Yeah.
And it was right when I got back, and I was kind of lost in my work, and I started making those, and he's like, that's a distraction, stop doing that. But it's actually really therapeutic. I need them. And I have a photograph of a group of them that's not in the show, but that it's one of my favorite pictures of mine. It's another really personal picture, kind of like the bread or something. But I think that there's a clue in them that I haven't really figured out yet. Whether that's to something I've made or something I'm going to make, I'm not sure.
Well, you're acknowledging it by having it here to begin with.
Yeah.
So that's important. The other question is, I know a little bit of your history, and I was wondering how much your dad being an architect affects the way you actually see photography. in terms of placing it within the world?
I don't know about the actual, the making of a photograph. As far as that's concerned, my mother's brother, my uncle, was a photographer and was the one who kind of first introduced me to photography. And I have a box of his photographs at my house that I sift through on occasion. And it's amazing, like the shared sensibility there. Like there are things I pick up. He has this beautiful, he's passed away sadly, but he has this beautiful photograph of just a red bucket floating in a swimming pool. That's like one of my favorite photographs ever, made by, and of course there's like a huge sentimental pull for me, but it's just a really, and so I think as far as actually making the work goes, a lot of that comes more from him, but as far as my father goes, there's one thing that I remember my father telling me one time that I think about whenever I think about installations or anything, where he said, you know, I've never really had one style of building buildings. It's whatever suits the project. So, you know, if he's building something in Colorado, maybe he's going to make it look like a European ski lodge, but he's building something in Arizona. I don't know. He's a complicated figure. He builds golf resorts, so always.
And golf resorts are also something that's nature and not nature.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And golf resorts in Arizona, I'm just like, do it somewhere where there's actual grass. Please. Yeah. Florida.
So
John,
this is the second question?
you golf. I know you love
That
golf.
was the
Nothing
second
against golf.
Yeah.
You talk a little bit about that gorgeous photo of the surveillance.
Sure. Yeah, the barn swallows. Yeah. That picture, well, just, I mean, from like how it's made or what the situation
It has
was?
like gravitated to it because there's like a sort of like maybe political like worldview in it with those.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe birds behind the eye of the surveillance camera. And I'm curious whether that's
No, definitely.
a bigger window into what you're up to.
I mean, I think that there's, I've never been totally over politically in the work, but like there's definitely a sense that it's all guided by my politics for me. And I think that picture, I mean, it's one of the more conspicuous ones, and I'm glad that you picked up on it. I mean, I really love the one bird that's not screaming, but it's actually looking right at you along with the camera. But then the camera is kind of the mouth then for that one. And there's something really kind of tricky about that for me. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely well, when I was an undergraduate, I just photographed security cameras straight up, like for a while. And then I was like, oh, everyone's photographing security cameras, so I'm not going to photograph security cameras anymore. And that, it kind of came back there because it was a situation where it was more than just the obvious kind of comment. There was this whole other world kind of coming in. The birds, you know, there's like the buildup of bird shit on top of the alarm there behind it. And I feel like that sort of like play, like there's this sort of futility of their nesting there in this way, because I also feel like, well, it's that red alarm, and I feel like if it were to go off, like it would just disturb the entire, it would be horrible, you know? It's a really precarious picture, I think, but also a really beautiful one, because it's depicting something it's incredibly magical, I think, the feeding of those baby birds. I actually sat there for like a half hour and just watched both parents were going and getting the food. Right? I think it was both parents. I don't know. I swear it was two birds. But you know, I'm unreliable as far as that's concerned. But it was really, really wonderful. And then, but the entire time I was sitting there, I was like, is someone just watching me stare at these birds? And if they are, they're just looking at me stare blankly at what they think is a blank wall. This is a strange situation that I've gotten myself into at half-price books. I'm glad that you kind of picked up on that.
It's hilarious as you're talking about it, not to mention it behind you, we have a nest in that bush, and just start talking like a bird on a chirp. To the nest back and forth, so it's kind of a nice little surface. And you have a camera there,
Yeah.
like pointing at you, pointing at the birds.
Yeah.
So it's kind of great. Another question.
No.
I was wondering if you're still doing something where you were just reading about animals.
No, that was 2017 exclusively.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
like
yeah.
that year.
You were just reading about animals?
The entire year of 2017, I restricted myself to only reading books about animals, and it was really constructive in certain ways because I read a lot of things that I probably never would have otherwise. Like I read a book that was just a really, really dry description of everything you would ever want to know about the European mole. So like I know a lot about moles now. They're fascinating.
Yeah.
And like any photograph you ever see of a mole is probably staged. That's probably a dead mole, which I didn't know. But moles don't really come above like you see these photographs of moles in burrows, and they don't do that. Those are dead moles that have been popped up there. But
Like the Civil War figures. Huh?
yeah, exactly.
I just saw this look of shock. And I was like, that was probably the image that got to go the most here. Those are dead moles?
But it got really old come like November. I was so I couldn't like keep reading.
Yeah.
I didn't read in December because I was just so tired of books. But then accidentally the first book I decided to pick up in January when I had total freedom was an old favorite, which was Cortazar's Blow Up. And the first story in that is about animals. And I was like, I can't escape. It's the actual old story.
Yeah. The year when you only watch movies where the lead character is a dog, that's going to be the hard one.
Oh, God. I'm not going to do that. Those movies are never good.
What do you think, Benji?
Oh, I saw
Yeah,
one.
right?
Question, you said that, I didn't forget the descriptive, but you were uncomfortable or didn't like taking photos of people.
Yeah.
And that's an interrelated question, that's why. And then second is, have you done other people by taking objects like bread and cars?
Yes, I have done that, absolutely. But to answer the first question, it's partially I just like I get nervous. I don't. There's a little bit of an ethical element to it where I don't always feel totally comfortable portraying somebody, but way more than that, I just get really nervous. I get nervous around people, and so when I'm photographing, it's like a lot of pressure, and I don't know. I've never really even been drawn to other people's photographs of people so much as I am. Like if people make a body of work and some portraits and some other things, the other things have always been more interesting ones to me. It's unique to photography. Like I like other figurative art, but I don't know. There's something. I don't know.
You can't stare at it for 2 hours.
No, yeah. I think a lot of it really is just, I've done it in the past, and sometimes people hire me to take their headshots or something, and it's not comfortable. It doesn't feel like the thing that I want to be doing. There's a slight ethical element, just as far as like. There's a lot of conversations about that, but for the most part, it's just nervousness.
However, we would like to see a Las Vegas wedding documentary.
Oh no, yeah, that's the thing. If anyone wants to hire me to photograph your wedding, I would love to. I've never no one's ever asked me to photograph a wedding. I would really like to do it in the way that I would want to do it. It's been a dream of mine for like.
So what exactly would that would entail?
I don't know. I mean, it would just be like this, basically.
Some cake in a bag on the side.
Yeah. You'd get some. I don't know. I just think it'd be really fun. That was a conversation that came up at the opening.
We consider it.
Yeah.
Well, I can guarantee you, I mean, I saw the show last week, and I saw the show again with Bucky earlier, and then while people were assembling, I walked through and I kept finding things I had not seen on the first 2 viewings. So I guarantee you, the more time you live with these and we can go back to photographs, you were like, wait, there is something there. Like I didn't see the toad in Toad until I saw the title was Toad, and then I found the toad. So I was like, oh, okay. So there's all of these. Like I was describing what he did with the architecture of Jonathan's gallery as being like a time-based art form, like constructing a film in space, because you've got to wander through to sort of see the movie-like qualities, and you're like, oh, this image comes, this revelation comes. There's something very literary about the way you construct a show too.
Yeah.
And I did from his show at the Omov, I bought my favorite photograph, which I have actually next to one of Deborah Herrera's photographs in my dining room of this puppet grackle bird that was looking for the show. And it's funny to see it in relationship to artists' work other than his.
Oh, I'd love to.
But in the combination here, it's like it's a sequence over time. And it's very cinematic and very literary. Any more questions? Or? Okay. Well, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
It was